You know, the hot topic, immigration reform, border security. I think the most important thing for everyone in this room to understand is that they are inextricably linked or connected. You can't focus on one, you know, without focusing as much effort on the other. If you do, we're just doomed to failure. Neither one will work. It's in that context that what I would like to do is talk about the importance of getting it right, getting border security and immigration reform, getting it right. Folks, today we've got about 51 foreign terrorist organizations that have been formally designated by our State Department and with the help of Congress, the Taliban. Of those 50, roughly half are involved in one or more aspects of the global drug trade, other forms of transnational organized crime. And it's important for all of you, I believe, to understand some strategic threats tied to all that you may not be thinking about and that some of your bosses may not be thinking about. You know, this room is full of important folks that have got the ability to influence in some fairly high places. And so hopefully you walk away with some additional information today that will help you do that. There are many nasty byproducts that are part of the growing confluence of drugs and terror. Let me talk about one of the foreign terrorist organizations that I happen to believe is the most threatening. And you don't have to take just my words for it. Director Mueller, Mike Chertoff, when he was the Secretary for Homeland Security, felt the same way, testified before Congress, and felt very strongly that Al-Qaeda, certainly a threat. Do we need to stay focused on them? Do we need to, to kill them? And the Hydra, absolutely. But the real threat was Hezbollah. And part of the reason is because as things continue to heat up between us and Iran, if Iran is going to strike the homeland, if Iran is going to strike our national security interests outside the continental United States, they're going to use Iran, and they're going to use the IRGC Quds Force. It's important also to understand that when you talk about Hezbollah, you have got to include at least thinking about the Quds Force in the same light. Both are heavily involved now in the global cocaine trade. I don't think there's any evidence that paints a more kind of menacing and absolutely crystal clear picture of that than the DEA case that resulted in the OFAC sanctions against the Lebanese Canadian bank, some of its affiliates, the Prime Bank of Gambia and others, for laundering as much as $200 million a month in Hezbollah's cocaine trafficking funds. Let's put that into perfect perspective. Iran, the best estimates are is that they provide Hezbollah about $200 million a year in funding, and that's diminished. The sanctions appear to be working at least to a degree. But again, put that in perfect context. Hezbollah is making, at least on one case, folks, one case, clearly demonstrated as much as $200 million a month being laundered by the Lebanese Canadian bank and some of these other nefarious financial institutions that have been long known for laundering Hezbollah's money. It's also important to understand that Hezbollah, the Quds Force, are operating in exactly the same space at exactly the same time as the most powerful organized crime entities that law enforcement, international law enforcement that the world has ever been faced with or ever confronted. Those being the Colombian cartels, or the remnants of the old guard of the Colombian cartels, now the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, a hybrid terrorist organization. Understand something, that this is a group that is a designated foreign terrorist organization by our country, the European Union, many other countries around the globe, but they have also evolved into the single largest manufacturer and distributor of cocaine in the world. This is the same group, ladies and gentlemen, that are now responsible for manufacturing fully submersible, not semi-submersible, fully submersible submarines that can dive to a depth of 100 feet with a payload of 8 to 10 tons of cocaine, that are making their way all the way into the Pacific's central coast of Mexico, and they can go further. If they're capable of doing that, and the Hezbollah and FARC has come together, if they're capable of doing that, what more could be on those submarines? What other kinds of payloads could they deliver? It's all pretty shocking business, and it's only getting worse. What we've got to do is what we've got to focus on, I believe, is we've really got to get serious about driving a wedge between these two very powerful threats: foreign terrorist organizations and transnational organized crime, more specifically, these very powerful drug trafficking cartels that are operating around the globe. Thanks to the growing demand for cocaine in Europe. And understand something, probably within the next 1 to 2 years, there will be more cocaine destined for Europe than there is for the United States, coming from the Andean region, more specifically, most all of it's at least departing South America from Venezuela. But more destined for Europe than there is destined to the United States. Now, some may think or say, kind of cynically, if you will, well, that's not a bad thing for us. That's pretty good news. The bad news, folks, is all the money is coming back into our neck of the woods. That's the problem. And as long as there is a never-ending funding stream that will constantly fill the war chests of terrorist organizations like the FARC and the Hezbollah, then we've got a long fight on our hands in the global war on terror. And I happen to believe that it is ongoing, and it's going to continue to pose an enormous threat to our country for many, many years to come. What do we do to fix it? There are four things that we can do that will not cost trillions of dollars, that will not cost billions of dollars. It's going to cost a few, probably tens or hundreds of millions. But here they are. We need to focus on developing a defense in-depth strategy. We are obsessed with defending the 1 yard line and developing strategies to defend the 1 yard line, our southwest border with Mexico. Any strategy to defend a 1 yard line, I don't care if it's on our southern border, our northern border, or any other border in the world, it's a strategy or strategies that are doomed to failure. We need a defense in depth. 60% of all the detection and monitoring resources from our Department of Defense that were focused on Latin America, the Andean region, the Isthmus of Central America, Mexico, post 9/11. Within days after 9/11, those resources were dedicated or moved to other parts of the world. They have never come back, folks. And that's why we cannot detect, and when we occasionally get lucky and do, stick with these fully submersible submarines now that are sailing unimpeded in the Eastern Pacific. The second thing that we need to do, we need more resources downrange, a defense in depth. We've got 21,000 Border Patrol agents now. I don't think we need more. We need to get more resources downrange into Latin America. We need to revitalize our efforts in countering the traditional threats. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a practitioner. I don't come from academia, okay? I've got 37 years in this business now, and was fortunate enough to rise to the rank of the Chief of Operations with DEA. That's got the largest U.S. law enforcement presence abroad. I see this, saw this, felt this, touched this day in and day out. We took our eyes off of drug trafficking, powerful drug trafficking groups, human trafficking groups, gun runners, and money launderers after 9/11. And we have never refocused on those threats. Here's what I can tell you. Someone in this room, anyone in this room, tell me what a terrorist looks like, please. But we've got far too many of our resources that are focused on tracking down terrorists. And we're not having a lot of luck these days. But if you focus on drug trafficking groups, if you focus on gun runners, if you focus on money launderers and the human traffickers, our assets, law enforcement assets, federal, state, and local, will naturally come in contact, as well as our Department of Defense and intelligence community, will naturally come headlong, face-to-face, in contact with those who will do us harm, because they have all come together. Terrorist groups, drug trafficking cartels, and other transnational organized crime groups all rely on the same shadow facilitators to shoot, move, and communicate, and to keep their groups moving forward. We need to focus on the gray areas where we're not focused today after all these years after 9/11. We need to develop interlocking strategies and, more importantly, singular funding streams between counter-narcotics and counterterrorism. I don't want to beat up any of my colleagues in the FBI, CIA, Department of State, or any other of our America's security institutions, but if you look at most of them, they have their counter-narcotics and organized crime directorates, and they have their counterterrorism directorates. The two are not communicating. They're not talking together. They're driven by absolutely differing, totally different motivations. Much of it's driven by money. Much of it's driven by funding streams. That's where some of your bosses can come in handy. Interlocking strategies, singular funding streams. We need to bring it together, because the bad guys are growing closer together, and as they're doing that, we just keep drifting further apart in our nation's security apparatus. Finally, we have absolutely need to get serious about and bolster our anti-corruption campaigns within our within our judicial system. And I'm talking about internally, folks. It's important that we try to clean up Afghanistan and help some other countries also, but we've got a problem internally. The Mexican cartels, the Colombian cartels, spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year to corrupt every aspect of our and their judicial processes. Why? Because it allows them to operate. We've had over 300 Border Patrol agents alone that have been arrested over the past 5 years for corruption. The reason we've beat organized crime in this country, and the reason we have experienced successes, not wholly in a judicial dimension, though, is because we have a strong judicial process in our country. You look at any ungoverned or ungoverned space or region around the world that is in the situation that they're in. I don't care if it's Afghanistan, I don't care if it's Guinea-Bissau, where it's at. It is because corruption is at the root of all their problems. We need to get focused on cleaning up corruption internally as seriously as we are focused on cleaning up corruption in some other parts of the world. Much of what I've captured, I testified to about a year ago before the Homeland Security Committee, and I've got about 20 or 25 statements for the record that I'll leave up here somewhere. You can grab them at the end.
Great.
Any questions?
Michael, thank you.
You bet.
Questions? Let me get a mic over here, please.
Just wanted to ask you a devil's advocate question. When you talk to people in the Obama administration about kind of a defense in depth, what they will say is that you're inherently limited because as Americans try to project agents, power, you name it, in Latin America, there's this inevitable reaction to so-called Yankee imperialism. What's the response?
Here's my response is there has never been a better time than now. The timing and lighting is absolutely perfect. If you look at, listen, Central America is coming apart at the seams. We know what's happening in Mexico. Central America is coming apart at the seams. Enormous problems arising again throughout the Andean region and kind of northern part of South America. Most leaders in those countries, Honduras is begging for DEA, the FBI, ICE, and other law enforcement institutions and our military SOUTHCOM to send more resources. Guatemala has opened its door to additional resources. We're not answering their call. Listen, I've spent a lot of time running Special Operations Forces, DEA, as well as our military forces on operations in the jungles of the Andean region and Central America back in the mid-1980s through the mid-1990s. And I'm telling you what, there was a lot of resistance from the countries that we were working in back in those days. You know, they weren't pushing us out, but they weren't welcoming us with open arms. That's all changed. Again, the timing and lighting couldn't be better than it is right now.
One more question. Yes, ma'am. Right here at the back.
Michael, I really appreciate your presentation more than anybody else in this room.
Thanks.
I wanted, this past week, I was monitoring the hearing on the House side regarding illegal immigration. And what was stunning to me was in the second panel, we had one agent from ICE. And I don't know if you heard his presentation or not, but what was so alarming is he graphically described how ICE agents are no longer able to do their job in the interior. And what you're talking about, the cartels, are well integrated and inserted in all the major cities in the United States and all of our, well, anyway, they're well embedded,
Sure.
along with the money laundering and all that. So my concern with what you're presenting, which is, you know, terribly serious, but at the same time, we're seeing our Republicans in the House are now having to embrace illegal, an amnesty of sort for 12 million, potentially. And I debriefed the original agent in charge of IRCA back in the 1986, and he said in that amnesty it was rife with all kinds of fraud, and it is ongoing. It's never ended. But anyway, can you connect what you're talking about with this political drive to embrace amnesty?
Well, listen, if you talk about immigration, I mean, you know, look, we rely heavily on ICE to focus on that threat. When you stop to consider, I mean, consider some of the things that I've already said, but when you consider that the Mexican cartels are operating in somewhere between, depending on who, what expert you're talking to, somewhere between 300 to 500 cities across the United States, from large cities to my hometown and, well, 1,500. I'm not sure I would go that high. Suffice it to say, 300 to 500 is pretty alarming to me. Okay, and should be alarming to everyone in this room. But when you consider that, and then you consider the fact that the Hezbollah has now developing and continuing to nurture relations with the Mexican cartels, the Colombian cartels, including the FARC, and and some other pretty nasty, nefarious actors around the globe. It causes me to lose sleep 4 years after I retired from government service and many years with DEA. If anyone thinks for a moment that Hezbollah did not recognize years ago the strategic importance of the Mexican cartels and their involvement in drug trafficking all across the United States, then they're absolutely, just missing the boat. They just don't understand how the underworld works. That's what concerns me the most.